So he left off with Zach as Paul was bringing the message to the Jews. He was preaching to them, telling his whole life story more or less. He started from the beginning and what he was and what he did and how the Lord showed himself to him on the road to Damascus and revealed himself and how he changed his ways. And then as they were listening to him, when it got to the point when God told him to take it to the Gentiles, it all flared up. So they started throwing dirt and got it riled up. It brung in the Roman chief. He was going to arrest him, or did arrest him. And Paul looked at him and said, you're shackling a Roman. So that got his attention because he couldn't do that. So as he was wanting to leave, Paul looked at him and said, let me just, things had calmed down. He said, let me say one more thing to the people, So he said, all right. So he started preaching again, and he riled them up again, So the guy said, I got to get you out of here. So he took him, and he didn't know what to do with him. Mm-hmm. He said, because, he was a Roman. They were all mad at him. They wanted him to be, to be beat or whatever, be punished. He, being a Roman citizen, he didn't want to put him in shackles. So he said, I'm going to take you to the Sanhedrin. I'm going to take you and let your people judge you. So, and that's where we're at today in chapter 23. At verse 1. Let me get my glasses. And it says, and Paul earnestly, beholding the council, said, men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. So he started out with them, at the very beginning. When he came to this council, now this council, the chief Roman guard here, they didn't go to the Sanhedrin court. The Sanhedrin court was on the Temple Mount on the other side of the temple. So he called them there. This was like an unplanned meeting. It was an impromptu. It wasn't like scheduled on their books. He told them to come to him. So in this amount of time, you had the high priest and the 70 elders had to come to this garden. They was going to have a meeting over Paul. And here's Paul in front of them, and he addresses them as men and brethren. Mm-hmm. Now, we've read before, Peter and Stephen met with this same Sanhedrin court. And when they addressed the court, he addressed them as elders and fathers. Both of them did. Paul addressed them as men and brethren. Yeah. There's a difference. Because, we'll as we study and read through this, I'll get more detail of how this was important, how he addressed them. And he says, and I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Paul, within his conscience, felt like, he was in the right. I hadn't done nothing wrong. With your conscience, we all have a conscience. And it tells us whether we do good or whether we do bad. And Paul evaluated himself with his conscience, all of my conscience, I've done good. It says, it's like what was in his heart, what you see Paul had done, anything that Paul had done was in his heart.
Yeah.
And that's how people sees us. Whatever how your heart is what people will see.
Mm-hmm.
And you can put up a front. You can lie to people, you can put up a front, but a lot of times people see right through you. Why? Because your actions. Because your heart, your actions and how you say, how you think, and how you do, you may tell somebody one thing, but your actions will tell people a whole different thing. And your actions will always follow your heart. Because the heart won't lie to you. The heart always tells you the truth. Whether it's a black heart or a white heart, however how your heart is, it's going to protrude out. And it's going to be self-evident. And you'll think you're hiding it from everybody else. But everybody else sees it, but nobody else is probably going to tell you about it. So our outward expression is our inward conviction. Through Paul's ministry, since the day one, he has kept his appointment or his mission. Whatever God told him to do, he's kept it. From the day one, when he was hit from on the road to Damascus, Paul said, "You're going to preach my word. You're going to be mine." And from that very day, he has kept his mission up until now. He has done what he was supposed to do. And even though all this time that his mission was to spread the gospel to the Jews first and to the Gentiles, what has he been up against? Affliction. And no matter what affliction that has been presented itself to him, it has not deterred his mission. So he has stayed true to God. He has stayed true to himself and to his brothers, because that was his goal. And as he's going through this affliction, what does he do? Through all this, when he goes through the floggings, the beatings, and the stonings, what does he do? He points everything to God, to Jesus Christ, because that was his goal. And that's what Jesus
told him up front, said, "I will show you what things you must suffer for my name's sake."
Yeah. And that's what he was doing it. He has followed it to all the way up until right now. He has followed it. And that's the way we were supposed to be. Even though every day is not the greatest day. Every time we turn around, there's going to be something that will arise. There's going to be an affliction. There's going to be something that will present itself to us that's going to be a deterrence of what we're supposed to be doing. But we're supposed to what? Let people show Jesus in us. Because through our affliction, now we can go through certain situations in our life. We can sit there and we'll blame it on God. We can turn our backs on God and say, "I'm done because he didn't take care of me." And then people will look at that and say, "There, that's not for me. That's not." But then you take your affliction and you give it to him, and he brings you through it. That what does that do? It gives other people hope. Like if Jesus will take care of him, he'll take care for me. Because we all have our problems. We all have our difficulties. It might not be getting beat like Paul has been, but there's going to be days that we're going to run through conflict. But at the same time, you don't sit there and keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself and go through your battles. That's when our testimonies is the greatest. We got to give God the glory. We got to say, "I'm going through this, and it's hard. I'm getting beat up. But praise God, he's bringing me through this. Because without him, we're nothing." And that's where we lie. We like to, a lot of times we'll present ourselves and walk through this world and say, well, I don't know how he's doing it. And you'll go through and say, well, buddy, it ain't easy, but I'm doing it because I'm strong. I was raised better than that. I was raised not to give up. But at the same time, I was all last night on my hands and knees and praying that God would help me. It wasn't the fact that I'm being all gung-ho and all self-confident. There's going to be times in your life when you're by yourself and you're going to sit there and cry like a baby because you're defeated, and the only person you can turn to is Jesus Christ, because that's where your strength and love comes from. But at the same time, when you don't tell nobody how weak you are and how good God is, then that is dissipated. Yeah. He's not getting the glory. Paul always gave Jesus Christ the glory when everything went astray or went wrong for him. It was always pointed to Jesus Christ. Because Paul knew that's where his strength came from. That's where our salvation comes from. That's where everything comes from, is Jesus Christ. It says, and the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law. He's, Paul's human. That ticked Paul off. Having him to hit him. Like, I didn't do nothing to be right. To be hit, like, to be smitten. He said, but at the same time, Paul didn't know who he was talking to. Paul was talking, when Ananias told him to hit him, he was the high priest. And that's when in verse 4 it says, and they stood by, said, revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. So, Paul knew the word. He knew the law. So, here he is. He's sitting in front of the people, of the 70 plus the high priest. And, and the 70 was made up. That was like the Old Testament from Moses, of the 70 elders to represent. So here they are. And let me give you some background on Ananias. Ananias, and it's not the same Ananias as it was in Acts chapter 5. Because he was the one that served and started the early church. But Ananias started serving in 47 AD. And he served into the first Jewish revolt in 66. Now in 70, that's when the Romans leveled the temple, when Jesus had predicted that there would be no stone left on top. So Josephus was the Jewish historian, and he wrote everything down. That's what a historian does. And Josephus said that Ananias was corrupt. The Jews hated him. He was gluttonous, violent. He was in the hip pocket of the Romans. He took money that was supposed to be tied to other priests, because that's how the priests survived, through the tithes, and that because they were supposed to be working for God, and that was their job. So he would skim off the top of the other priest and put it in his back pocket, and then he would use that money to bribe other Romans and other wealthy Jews. So here you have a high priest that's supposed to be representing God's elite and representing the people to God, and he's corrupt. Yeah. So There was no respect there.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul looked at him, and he asked him, like, why did you smite me? And he called him a white wall, which is, if you would translate it, it's like whitewashed. So he said, then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou white of wall. He said, so you're sitting there all whitewashed. You're corrupt. If you ever know what whitewash is, you can take an old rotten piece of wood or something, and old people they didn't have the money to replace a board or something, so they just whitewash it.
Dad would mix it up for us. What was it? It was lime and water or something, Wasn't that what it was?
Yeah.
Lime, you take lime and mix water. That's what Paul was saying. You're whitewashed. You ain't painted, you're whitewashed. You're temporary. Rain comes, it'll wash that off.
Uh-huh.
And it would. And whitewash, you'd have to do it several times a summer. We would do the fence. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But there was two other times that whitewashing was mentioned in the Bible. Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, telling them that they were white as sepulchres or tombs. They were white on the outside, but what was on the inside was dead.
Yeah.
And then Ezekiel chapter 13 was talking with false prophets that they were whitewashed with plaster. So they were being false prophets. What was on the inside didn't reflect what was they portraying on the outside. They were dead. They were not truthful. They weren't presenting what they were supposed to be. Oh yeah, you're the high priest, but on the inside, he was far from it.
Yeah.
His heart wasn't with Jesus or God. It was far from it. And he told him to his face, he said, you're just being whitewashed. So you have this predicament, and the people thought, like there's been a sort of debate like of why maybe Paul didn't recognize him as the high priest. And but for once, when we had this meeting, it was an informal meeting. If it was in a formal meeting, the high priest would have had his garb on, and you would automatically know that was a high priest. So maybe that since this was an impromptu meeting called by the chief Roman guard, that he might not have had his garb on. Where Paul did recognize him, but was being sarcastic to him, saying, you are the high priest, but I don't recognize you, the high priest, because you're far from it. And then another scholar has said too that Paul's eyesight was not good. It said in chapter 4, when he writes in Galatians that when he had come the first time preached to them, that they would have plucked out their eyes and gave them to Paul, because they knew that he struggled. Like we would, if we could, we'd give you our own eyes so that you could see. And Paul commented about in Galatians, that he commented when he was writing about the large letters I write to you. If you look at Galatians, that's a small letter. So Paul was having to write real big letters, so that when he was writing, he could see it for himself. So that tells people that Paul did have an eye problem. He might not couldn't see clearly enough to say that was the high priest. But regardless, we all know that Paul knew that he was corrupt and that he was presenting himself as the high priest, but he was far from it on the inside. And some of us do the same thing. We might say we're Christian, and present ourselves. I can put on a suit and get up here and try to teach, but what does my heart on the inside?
Yeah.
Jesus knows, and Jesus will judge me for that. But that is the truth. Every one of us, we go out into the world and present ourselves. Are we presenting ourselves as Christians? Do we proclaim to be Christians? And does it match what's inside our heart? And at the same time, Paul even quoted the law. They got on to him and said, are you going to question the high priest? And Paul told him the law. Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people.
Yeah.
And he said, he was more or less publicly saying, I'm sorry. So I sort of ruled out that it wasn't sarcasm, because he apologized publicly, saying, because Paul knew the law, and I don't think Paul would purposely break the law to try to make a point. So apparently Paul did not know that what it seems like, because he wouldn't apologize publicly for it. But Paul was still respecting the high priest. He still respected the office, no matter the office that this was. This was a high office, being the high priest, and Paul still respected that and apologized for that. So we look at ourselves at some of our local officials, or even our president or senators. We still have to respect their office.
Yeah.
We might not agree with them. We may think they're corrupt or dirty, but at the same time, as Christians, we need to pray for them, that they would at least make the wisest decision, that instead of being maybe corrupt or dishonest or whatever we may think, everybody knew that this was a corrupt high priest. But Paul still apologized and still respected him. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead. I am called in question. So here we are, Paul using his wisdom only that he could. When he was in this, they was going to preside over him. They were going to, as a ruling body, they was going to be able to tell that Roman, do we find him guilty or we not guilty? We can have him be put to death. And Paul realized that he was calling a brother. He knew he was a Pharisee. He knew the law. And he saw how many Sadducees was in there, and he saw how many Pharisees was in there. And he said, boys, he might have went, it had been 20-some years since probably Paul had been in the area. Because this was his last third mission. And he was getting back to Rome. And we're going to Rome. He never had been, but he was going to go to Rome. And he might have saw some of the people that he was taught to, like pupils that was taught the law. Because you had to be taught as a young boy. He might have seen people that he might have grew up with or been taught by the high priest, or, maybe recognized some of them. But regardless, he did know that there was Pharisees and Sadducees. So he knew right then what was he more or less there. What the last time that he was arrested for? Why was he arrested? For telling his testimony on the steps. And what did he say? He said that Jesus Christ saved his soul. And they all knew Jesus died on the cross, but they didn't believe. Not all believed that he was resurrected. And that he came to me on the road to Damascus, made me blind, healed me, had a man come and heal me, and told me to teach his word. So that was telling them people, and he said, so I'm telling you, I believe in the resurrection. Well, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. Sadducees were a small elite group composed of the priestly family that were known for what they denied. They rejected all aspects of the supernatural, which was miracles, angels, and resurrection, rejected all the Old Testament except for the 5 books of Moses. Politically, they were liberals to appeal to Rome. They were thinkers, they were philosophers, they were what we would think as liberals. And the Pharisees, they accepted Old Testament and also much tradition, which was regarded as the oral law, did accept supernatural miracles and resurrection. They had the law, and then they even added on to the law. They kept adding on to the law to where you couldn't keep the law because it was so much law. So it's sort of funny, it was more toward conservatism. So you have conservatives and you got liberals, just like we have today. Liberals and conservatives. And just like today, they didn't get along, they fought and they debated and they never could get to common ground. And Paul knew this. So he threw it out. He said, I'm here because I preached resurrection. So when he had said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. So here they are, they started arguing. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. I don't know if they knew it or not, but they were professing that Jesus Christ arose and that the very thing that they were, that the only common ground that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had in common, that there was no Christianity. They did not believe in Jesus Christ as a Christianity or religion. And here they are, they're getting so riled up wanting to fight against themselves that the Pharisee says, we believe in him. He professed the resurrection. You know, they didn't care as long as they made their point to the Sadducees that they were going to win this debate, whether or not they more or less shot themselves in the foot. And here's Paul said, like Ronnie said, divide and conquer. And the one person I feel sorry for is the chief Roman guard, because everywhere he took Paul, there was a riot. He let him speak one more time on the steps. He got him riled up again. So he takes him to the high council, thinking, all right, I'm going to let these people judge him, and my hands will be washed. What does he do? He starts a riot between the two, and he says, and we find out in the next verse right here, he says, and when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and to bring him unto the castle. So he said, I got to get this man out of here. Get him out. So they take him to what was the castle, but they took him to the very place, to the jail cell where that Peter was held. One other time when I taught, Peter was in jail and the chains fell off of him, and he walked out, sort of like he was in a daze, like he was dreaming, and he went to the house, and they said, Peter, you know, this was the same place that they were keeping Paul. So we look at it. So here you find Paul. He's in jail again. And now He's in the same place as Peter. And we know before that, you know, Peter, Jesus didn't let him stay a night. He got him out of there. And in verse 11 it says, and the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. So, sometimes you might think, here you have Paul, he's done good. Peter was in jail and walked out. Paul's in jail and Paul has to stay. Paul's been there a day and then another night. And when sometimes you look at yourself and other people, why is it happening to me? And it don't happen to them? Or how come it was so easy for them, but it's so hard on me? You know, Paul knew the word, and Paul knew things that what had happened, you know. So here he is in jail, and there was 5 times that Jesus throughout Paul's ministry came to him, and then every time that Jesus had come to Paul was when Paul was really down.
Come on, buddy.
Here he is now, he's in jail again. And he's in that same jail as Peter. He probably said, well, you know, Jesus, you took Peter out here, you let him walk out. I've been here almost a day, a night, and another night. You know, and I'm doing everything you tell me to do. I'm professing you, I'm claiming you, I'm trying to show everybody you and your love as good as I can. And it seems like every time I turn around, I'm getting beat. I'm getting scolded. And sometimes that's the way we feel like in our life. Every time we turn around, something's coming at us. Life is hard sometimes. Whether it be job, a marriage, your occupation, family. Things happen and you pray and you pray and pray and things just don't get better. And sometimes you want to blame God, like, why? Why? Because we all feel that way. And we can't say we all don't. And you're thinking to yourself, am I a weak Christian? You start blaming yourself. You say, am I in a good spot? Or what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you, God? How come you ain't blessing me? You start getting animosity toward others. And then you start looking at your other fellow Christians and say, what makes you so great? You start getting hard. Your heart. The devil starts working on you. You're trying to harden your heart.
Yeah.
So that Jesus can't talk to you. And we've all been there and we all know that. But the best advice I can get you to tell you is just stand still. And pray.
Wait on him.
You gotta wait on him.
Yeah.
Paul was waiting on him. Paul was getting beat. But when you're at your end, he's gonna show up. But when he shows up and he gets you through this, we need to tell somebody else. Because somebody's going to be going through it just like you.
Yeah.
It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow. But God's glory will shine through.
Amen.
He will. And that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to show the love and the longevity and the persecution that you might be taking. Just give it to him. Because, when you feel stuck, you just listen for God and stand still. And but no matter what, don't quit.
Right.
It says, sorrow may last for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Your morning's going to come.
Yeah.
But don't blame Jesus. Don't blame God. don't think that you can't get out of it. Because that's what the devil wants. God is faithful, and He has a purpose. For everything that you go through, there's going to be a purpose for you to go through that. And I guarantee you, when He helps you, His glory will shine through. You can't do it on your own. A lot of people, sometimes, we feel it's hard on us as Christians. Now think about it. What if you don't have Jesus at all? What if you don't know Him? And you're going through life and you're looking for answers and left and right, and there's no peace. And you don't have the hope or the satisfaction that somebody to lean on. It's even worse. So as Christians, stand still and pray and wait on Him. But if you don't know Jesus Christ today is a good day to know Him. He's just, He's faithful, and He wants you. There's no, if you're listening through Facebook, there's no coincidence. If you're here at this church, there's no coincidence. Jesus wants you to hear what He wanted you to hear. Today is the day of salvation.
Now is the accepted time.
Yeah, now is the accepted time. And then you got to make up your mind whether you want Him or not. There's no good time. There's no bad time. If you feel that prick of your heart, that's Him. He's wanting you to give yourself to Him. And be strong. But if we can learn anything from Paul, he waited on Him. And then the Bible tells us what it does. Jesus didn't stand afar. He stood right beside of him. He said, Paul, I'm here. You said you wanted to go to Rome. You said you did a good job. He said, you did a good job here. You professed my name in Jerusalem. Now I'm taking you to Rome. I'm going to take you to where you want to go. Because when you hit Rome, that was the Mecca. That was the cultural capital of the world. He said, I'm taking you to Rome. I'm giving your heart's desire. So I know you're going through this, but I'm with you. If you don't know Him today, He can be with you. So no matter what problems you may have, just give it to Him. That's my lesson today.
Bless your heart.